5-year-old child who fell into her enclosure, backing off when rescuers arrived. Some experts say that instances of animals, especially gorillas, showing compassion for other living things may be a whole lot more common than we realize. At the Gorilla Foundation in the San Francisco Bay Area, they've taught Coco, a 25-year-old female, to recognize sign language. Coco is Binti's aunt, and Coco's keepers say both animals' behavior is not surprising.
Binti, a female gorilla, like Coco, has very strong maternal instincts, and those are activated by babies. And it turns out babies of any species. Coco's was activated by a baby kitten, but also by baby humans. She very much likes to hold them.
An important factor in the behavior of both Coco and Binti was that they were hand-reared by humans and bonded to people at a very early age. We have not often thought of gorillas as warm and cuddly creatures. But now, thanks to Binti, we see that some of our closest genetic relatives are also compassionate. George Lewis, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Touching story, no matter how many times you see it. Well, how would you like to be charged twice as much for your long-distance service? That very thing is happening to some long-distance callers, and until the bill arrives, most are none the wiser. NBC's Mike Jensen tells us how it happens and how to keep it from happening to you.
May I help you? Yes, I'd like to make a long-distance call, please.
With deregulation, the $70 billion a year long-distance industry is a free-for-all. Hundreds of companies fighting for your business. Operators all over America asking you to choose.
And what long-distance company will you be using?
I don't know.
One moment, I'll connect you with, I don't know.
With who?
I don't know. You said that was a long-distance company you wanted.
With that, the call is routed to a tiny long-distance carrier called the I Don't Know Company. Dennis Deese runs it out of his home in Kennedale, Texas.
We are a small phone company. We handle, a few thousand calls each month. That's about it.
Small but ingenious. Deese has a whole roster of companies that get calls routed to them if their names are mentioned. The I Don't Care telephone company, the whoever company. Anyone is okay. Anybody. It doesn't matter. And call them long distance. He even has a company called No, in case the operator asks, do you have a preference? Dennis calls his business KT&T. Sound familiar, like AT&T? Only he charges about twice as much as Ma Bell and says there's nothing illegal or immoral about it.
Too many people sweat the small stuff. Don't try to memorize codes. Just dial 0 and ask for I don't care. Get your call over with.
All this is clever, but is it legitimate? Authorities like Robert Renya are looking into it, but so far have found nothing wrong.
It just sounded like something that someone had cooked up to be one step ahead of the competition. The problem is, where does that leave the consumer?
Gail McElvain knows where it left her. She and her husband George were charged $7 by one of Deese's companies for directory assistance.
I went through the ceiling. $7? And like I've told George, I could have driven down there for $7.
There's some people who are going to be unhappy. They think that every call should be very, very inexpensive. I respond, get a life to them.
Get a life, but also be very careful what you say when the telephone operator asks which long-distance service you want.
What long-distance company you want to use? I Don't Care.
Well, maybe you should. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
I think I'll ask for the "this is a free call" company next time. Serious problem.
Be careful, definitely. Glad we were able to bring that report to you.
When we come back, the TWA recovery team of divers talks frankly with Dateline's Keith Morrison.
Nightside continues. It has been more than a month since TWA Flight 800 exploded and plunged into the Atlantic Ocean just off Long Island, killing all 230 people on board. As investigators continue to look for that one important piece of wreckage that could solve the case, they say they're pretty certain of one thing, that it wasn't an engine problem that triggered that explosion. When or if conclusive evidence is found, quite possibly it will have been discovered and brought to the light of day by one of the men you're about to meet. The divers, whose sad and dangerous job it is to search the bottom of the sea, looking for victims and the truth. Here's Dateline's Keith Morrison's conversation with the divers last week.
Coming up on the mark. Traction. Neutral.
We have seen but tiny glimpses of what they're doing.
One's in the water.
Divers from the Navy and the police departments in New York City and Suffolk County. Some days as many as 160 of them scour the wreckage-strewn bottom of the Atlantic off Long Island.
We're working for you guys today, right?
Right. Mark, yeah. Over the past 3 weeks, these men and women in their rubber suits have been the shock troops in a war against time and tide. They have culled from the seabed tons of twisted steel and aluminum that used to be a 747. They have been working almost around the clock under appalling conditions.
We find debris from the airplane, sometimes bodies, sometimes personal items.
They're sending us down on targets that are as small as like a drinking glass, even smaller.
They are literally the unseen heroes of this gigantic recovery operation. After the Navy's high-tech sonars and lasers locate what they call targets and mark them with buoys, the divers go to work.
The Navy sonar doesn't give you too great an idea of scale. So we dive on a target, and it could be a body. That's why we're diving on it. And then if it turns out to be debris, we bring back the debris.
We talked this week with these 4 Suffolk County police divers for the first time. They've been aiding in the recovery since the night of the crash. They're members of the Marine Patrol. Normally in the summer, they'd protect boaters and enforce fishing regulations. And they've all recovered accident victims, but never on a scale like this.
We're doing a whole career's worth of recovery and searching in a few weeks. But this is what we do all year round.
They told us what it's like going down there.
When you're following the buoy line down to the bottom, you could see about 15 feet, 10 to 15 feet in front of you. But beyond that, it's just a black darkness. The sounds that we're used to hearing on the street, the birds, traffic, that all disappears. And the only sound that you hear are your bubbles when you're breathing. And when you get to the bottom, and there really isn't much life form around.
And when they get where they're going, it's what they call in their understated way a hostile environment. One Navy frogman described it as diving into razor blades. 12 stories below breathable air, 47 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 70 pounds of pressure per square inch on the divers. Jagged pieces of metal threatening to cut air hoses and flesh, twisted wreckage that can entangle and drown a diver.
What is the relative danger of this job?
If you're 120 feet down and you run out of air or a regulator or a piece of equipment fails, it could be real dangerous if all of a sudden you come into a problem. Or you get caught on something, you're entangled on something, and you're down there.
Because of the depth and water pressure and the threat of the bends, they have just 15 minutes on the bottom. And each diver can make only 1 descent a day. So in this race to find evidence and victims, every second is precious.
Back step. Back step.
Well, it feels good when you bring up something or you find what you're looking for. That's a high. That's something like, okay, maybe this is the piece that's going to help solve this thing, you know.
The kind of person who would go down there in the danger and the dark and the cold is someone who knows what fear is, how to deal with fear, and how to rise above it.
You can't get freaked out or psyched out. You can't start having strange thoughts going through your head. You have to be focused. You have to have confidence in your equipment, confidence in your skills, confidence in your partner, and you get through it.
We're bringing up everything, every target we're assigned to bring up. The pieces that are too heavy to lift, we rig, and they have a tug out there with an A-frame type crane on it to lift the heavy pieces.
Carefully, determinedly, they have worked their way in and around the twisted wreckage of the 747 to bring up most of the victims of the disaster.
The public asks you to do the most difficult work a person can imagine. Go down to the bottom of the ocean and look for bodies. How do you prepare for a thing like that?
When you bring in some of the bodies, you know, you feel it to yourself like, you know, well, this is maybe one more family that maybe you can put a little bit of closure behind it, have a loved one back. That's a lot, too, I think we think of.
The work is so demanding, so emotionally and physically draining for the divers and the other officers involved. The department has specially trained cops like Doug Loughton, peer counselors, to look after them.
I think the hardest thing for the officer is to shed a tear, because he figures that because he's a police officer and he's on this side of the badge, that he's not permitted to shed a tear. And that's it. And if you give him permission, say, it's all right to cry, because it's a sad thing. You give him permission to cry, he's going to purge himself. He's going to open up, and he's going to feel a lot better.
However they're able to do it, the divers were back out again today, just as they have been every day the weather has permitted, coaxing the sea to give up its dead and seeking the clues that will explain the end of Flight 800.
You've got to relate to a disaster like this much more directly than most of us do just reading in the paper or seeing it on television.
The tragedy is very real when you're out there and you're seeing the victims and you're seeing the wreckage. And for me, it's just a reminder of how precious life is.
Initially, there was concern that divers would face an additional danger during their mission, sharks, but the Suffolk County police divers say so far none have been sighted in the area.
Dangerous job. We wish them well.
Oh, yes.
When we come back, another look at sports and weather.
Stay with us.
All right, time for another check on sports here on the night side. The Texas Rangers set an American League record last night by playing their 15th straight game without committing an error. That's 15 games of fielding perfection and 1 game just short of the Major League record. The Indians were the Rangers' latest victims last night. Not only are the Western Division leaders making the routine plays, they're also making the flashy ones. Darrell Hamilton here robs Mark Carrion of a possible extra base hit. 4 innings later, Carrion was robbed again, this time by Juan Gonzalez. A diving catch in right field, there it is, that ended the game and wrapped up a 10-3 Rangers victory. Elsewhere in the American League, Seattle's Ken Griffey Jr. was also flashing the good glove at Yankee Stadium last night, depriving Bernie Williams of a hit. Great catch, but Griffey couldn't get them all, including this homer by Cecil Fielder, and the Yankees ripped the Mariners 10-4. Over in the National League, the Padres' Scott Sanders carried a no-hitter into the 7th inning against Montreal. That is until Darren Fletcher broke it up with this 2-out single. Sanders still got the win, and Ken Caminiti backed him up with a grand slam, his 3rd homer in 2 days as San Diego beat Montreal 7-3. There it goes. And now here's a look at last night's scores.
Thanks for sticking around as we turn to the national weather and some expected conditions for a city near you. Boy, do I love this. We take to the skies with these amazing aerial acrobatics. Wow. Here's a story about a man who not only followed his dream, he brought it to his own backyard. Here's Jennifer Brooks.
Roger Caron's backyard is unlike any you have ever seen. There is a railroad there, the 1-foot gauge, Leeds Junction, and Wales Railroad. Roger built it all himself from scratch. It has taken more than 15 years. The LJ&W has everything you might imagine an old railroad should have, and more. Roger says he has always loved trains. When he was a little boy, he used to run down and greet them at the Springvale Railroad Station every other day.
For some reason, there was a certain crew. They used to allow me to get up in the engine, and I used to do the shifting. As all I could do was to pull the steam valve, because I wasn't that heavy at the time, but that's what really got me going into the trains.
Later this month, all of this is going to be dismantled and then reassembled at Hartman's Train Museum in Intervale, New Hampshire. Roger says that way, more people can appreciate it.
I hate to see it going away, but on the other hand, where it's going to be going, it will be enjoyed by everybody, and mostly the youngsters.
For years, only a few people knew about the railroad in Roger Caron's backyard, but you can bet when it steams into Hartman's museum this fall, the secret will be out for good.
And time for us to chug on out of here. Thanks for watching.
Wildfires are burning this morning in 9 western states.
An executive with a major electronics company is free from his kidnappers, but at a heavy price.
And it looks like engine trouble was not a factor in the TWA crash. This is NBC Nightside for Tuesday, August 20th. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to NBC Nightside. I'm Tanya Strong.
Good morning. I'm Tom Donovan. Thanks for joining us. Topping our news, fires out west.
This is turning out to be a record-breaking summer in this country's timberlands, and no one is cheering. Wildfires are burning this morning, pushing the acreage blackened so far to record levels. NBC's Dan Lothian has the latest.
Devouring bone-dry hardwood, pine, and brush, there is plenty of fuel to feed this Northern California wildfire near Clear Lake. Flames racing across 70,000 acres in the Mendocino National Forest, turning trees into torches.
This is the biggest one I've ever been on. Just humongous. It's been a hard one to deal with.
For battle-weary firefighters, help is on the way from the Army. 600 Fort Carson, Colorado soldiers will soon be landing on the front lines. Hundreds were forced from their homes overnight as the wildfire doubled its threat and its size in just 6 hours.
You don't know from 1 minute from the next whether we're going to lose everything or be able to go back to it.
In San Luis Obispo County, 69,000 acres have burned. In Colorado, a fast-moving wall of fire forced 1,000 people from the Mesa Verde National Park, 600 acres burning there. While the situation appears grim, progress is being made. More than a dozen large blazes have been contained, and firefighters say the approaching weather could be in their favor. Troops from Fort Carson will stay on the fire lines in Northern California for up to a month. They will give some 19,000 firefighters a huge break and the support they need to bring this record fire season under control. Dan Lothian, NBC News, Los Angeles.
There is new scrutiny this morning surrounding the latest assisted suicide case involving Dr. Jack Kevorkian. NBC's Jim Avila explains.
The Curran family home in Boston. Inside, a woman in pain. Neighbors say they could hear her screams during the middle of the night. 42-year-old Judith Curran, mother of 2. Her husband says she had chronic fatigue syndrome, and at 270 pounds, she could not walk more than a few steps before collapse. Medical records obtained by NBC News show that her doctors had prescribed powerful pain medication because she ached all over. Jack Kevorkian read those medical reports and talked to the ailing Curran and her family for a year. Last week, he decided Curran was a good candidate for assisted suicide and supervised her injection with fatal chemicals.
She had a clearly demonstrable immune deficiency syndrome. Let me repeat that. Immune deficiency syndrome. Somewhere, some causative agent, whether it was a bacteria, whether it was a parasite, whether it was a virus, destroyed her immune system.
Still, no one claims her illnesses were getting worse or were going to kill her anytime soon. Chronic fatigue syndrome, muscle pain, and immune deficiency are not fatal.
Unless she had another condition that was lethal, there was no reason that we would expect her to die from these diseases.
Judith Curran's husband, Franklin, says that misses the point. It was not death his wife feared, it was years with pain.
I'm not arguing the point about terminal illness. What I'm saying is that she had a chronic, debilitating illness that annihilated her quality of life.
The Oakland County Medical Examiner's Office says Judith Curran's pain may have been mental. Her tissue samples show no evidence of any disease, certainly no imminently fatal diseases. She could have lived for decades.
She might have been depressed. She might have been having tough times, feeling low self-esteem because of being overweight, of other problems. This woman had no basis to be looking at the fatal outcome in the near future.
But there were other problems. NBC News has learned since 1989, police responded to the Curran household 9 times. Judith Curran made most of those calls herself. Police arrested her husband Franklin twice. The last time only 3 weeks ago, when he was charged with assault and battery. Curran claims the disputes erupted over his attempts to prevent her suicide. The American Medical Association said Kevorkian's latest assisted suicide illustrates the dangers surrounding the practice. Jim Avila, NBC News, Detroit.
Coming up in this hour, the latest on the presidential race during this week between the 2 political conventions. And what should you say the next time a phone service salesperson calls your house? Some answers coming up. Peace talks are going on this morning between Russia and the Chechen rebels despite a threat from Moscow. The Russians are giving the people of Grozny one more day to get out of town before launching an all-out bombardment. Many citizens are heeding the warning. Pro-independence Chechen rebels have seized, and Russian leaders want them out once and for all.
And also in Russia this morning, renewed questions about the health of President Boris Yeltsin. NBC News correspondent Rob Reynolds is keeping a close watch for us and has details from our Moscow bureau.
The question hanging over the Kremlin, just how sick is Boris Yeltsin? Exactly 5 years ago, Yeltsin was the picture of vitality. Strong enough to get up on a tank in front of the Russian White House and face down a coup by hardline communists. Today, ailing, Yeltsin was nowhere to be seen. And a well-informed source in the Russian medical establishment told NBC News that, in fact, Yeltsin will undergo heart surgery within weeks. The source says it is not that he is dying, but he has gone through a very difficult race, which took a lot of effort. He will go back to work after the double bypass surgery. The source said Yeltsin, seen here 8 days ago, will stay in Russia. American heart specialists may be brought in on the surgery. But a leading American heart surgeon says Russia is technically behind the United States and does far fewer bypass operations.
We do more of these operations than anywhere else in the world in this country, and he'd probably be best suited coming here.
2 heart attacks last year and a history of heavy drinking have taken their toll on Yeltsin. All summer, it's been clear that something was seriously wrong. At his inauguration, Yeltsin looked stiff, slurring his words as he took the oath of office. Aides say a grueling campaign left him exhausted. But even today, they were calling media reports about heart problems nothing but rumor and conjecture.
He spends hours every day working with documents. I can also confirm his handshake is firm.
The Kremlin promises to release a full medical report soon. Until then, Russia waits to learn whether the man who was strong enough to break communism can last another 4 years. Rob Reynolds, NBC News, Moscow.
There's a tit for tat going on between the United States and Cuba this morning. Cuba is kicking an American diplomat out, saying she carried out activities in what Cuba describes as incompatible with her diplomatic status. The State Department says the charges are not true, and in turn, the U.S. is telling a Cuban official in Washington that he has to leave.
A bloody protest ended this morning in South Korea. For 9 days, students in favor of North and South Korean unification protested. This morning, police fired tear gas during a raid on the college students. At one point, it's estimated 7,000 students were part of the protest. It is against the law in South Korea to hold pro-North Korean demonstrations.